Well, it's been a big day for photo ops in Canberra today, with the Albanese government rolling out the red carpet for the Chinese Premier as he continues his visit to Australia. And much of the focus has been on the renewed trade relationship with our two countries. And of course, that's important. But the elephant in the room remains China's growing hostility within our region, not to mention the litany of human rights abuses within China. For his take on how the trip has gone so far, let's bring in Sky News contributor Chris Uhlmann. Chris, welcome to the show. Now, we'll get to some of the specifics of the visit shortly, but what have been your initial observations from this trip?
Well, as you say, Caleb, it's a good thing that Australia is trading with China. It is our major trading partner. We need to have a good relationship with China on that front, but we should never trust China. And I'll bring you to a couple of issues that we saw today. We might go to those in more detail shortly, but what we saw with Cheng Lei was inside our own parliament that the Chinese government officials were trying to stop an Australian journalist from doing her job. And the silence of Australians is precisely what the Chinese government wants over the long haul. So there's a bit of pantomime there, which showed one of the key demands of Australia is that we stop behaving like the democracy we are. To me, that's far too big a price to pay for any kind of trade. And we were told, it is reported today, that Australian officials were told to bring burner phones into Parliament House. So inside our own Parliament, our security officials believe that there is a real and present danger that information may be stolen while the Premier is visiting Australia. Now, I don't think I've ever heard anything like that before in Australian politics. I know that we were told when we went overseas and we went to China not to take our phones. That's constantly the case. But I think that those two little incidents sort of loom large for me. It's the kind of relationship that we do have. We can have one of trade, but we can never have one of trust.
Well, you mentioned Cheng Lei there. Let's take a look. Of course, we know that she was blocked today by Chinese officials. Let's have a listen to what the Prime Minister had to say about this when he was questioned about what went down in that joint press conference.
Is it acceptable to import that kind of behaviour into the heart of Australia's democracy here in Parliament House?
Well, I didn't see that. I saw Cheng Lei and we smiled at each other during the event. Look, I'm not aware of those issues. It's important that people be allowed to participate fully.
I mean, the Prime Minister's not aware of it. Is this a bit like when he was in the back of a car and he said he couldn't possibly have known about a story that had broken because he was travelling? Like, surely someone would say to him, excuse me, this press conference, joint press conference between you and the Chinese Premier, Chinese officials tried to obstruct an Australian journalist who, of course, had previously been detained by China. If that's not something about which the Prime Minister should be concerned, I don't know what is.
Yes, and you would expect that a Prime Minister who's got good staff would be properly briefed before he went in to give a press conference and would be certainly aware of that. Well, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he wasn't, but he should have an opinion on it. And the opinion is obviously that Australia is a democracy, that trying to block journalists from doing their job in Australia is not something that an Australian Prime Minister would countenance, that in an honest and open relationship with the People's Republic of China it is, we have to accept China on its terms. It's a superpower, you know, so, and it will do as it will, but it has to accept us on our terms, and that's we're a democracy, and we must, at every turn, Caleb, and I can't say this loudly enough, the only thing that China really wants of Australia is our resources and our silence. Some might believe that our silence isn't much to pay, but in a democracy, Caleb, it's the only thing that's worth having. So it's not something that I am prepared to give up, not something I'm sure that you are prepared to give up. And I would hazard a guess that Australians aren't prepared to give it up.
Well, let's put all of this together. So you've got the incident with Cheng Lei today. You've got, as you say, the fact that people have been told to take burner phones into Parliament House because they're worried about phone tapping potentially happening while the Chinese are here. The economic relationship between our two countries is, of course, large. Two-way trade last year was worth $327 billion, which is a quarter of our total trade. So they are a very important trading partner and would be up the creek without them. But as you say, if you give up the things that actually allow you to operate as an independent democratic country, then what is the point of an economic relationship in the first place? Because you're opening the door to far more than an economic relationship. You're opening the door to a ruling relationship. And so you might be making lots of money, but the effect of making that money is essentially a sale of your values in your country.
Yeah, and greater than that, Caleb, because at the moment I'm doing a documentary on the energy transition, which will hopefully go to air on Sky in October. And I'll just run you through a few of the things that are obvious from what's happened to the West over this time. And in terms of the rise of China, if you put a pin in 1990 when China begins to rise and draw a line on its use of oil, its use of liquefied natural gas, and its use of coal, you'll see they've gone through the use. It burns 4% of the world's coal. It's the biggest user of liquefied natural gas. It's the second biggest user of oil in the world behind the United States. And what happened? It rose to enormous power on using those fossil fuel resources. What happened at the same time to Europe and to the United States as we decided that we were no longer going to use those resources? Well, they flatlined, both of them flatlined. So what we have done is we've turned China into the industrial powerhouse of the world by burning the world's fossil fuel. The only thing that's happened in the 20 years that we've been trying to cut it is that we have moved industrial production to China. We've moved all of the fossil fuel burning to China. Fossil fuel carbon dioxide continues to rise in the atmosphere because of China. Now, you do have to wonder about what the trade-off is that we have made on that. What is the cost of what we have done? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do something about combating climate change. All I'm saying is there's a certain iron law in the use of energy, and that is the person or the place that uses the most energy is the place that has the most power. Those things follow hand in hand.
And you talk about energy and electricity here. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Penny Wong, and I suppose that the government at the moment might be trying to suck up to China a little bit with the Premier in town, but she's sought to lead the coalition's stance on a 2030 emissions target to increasing China's influence in the Pacific region. Have a listen to what she had to say.
It is also him yet again abandoning the field in the Pacific. I still get when I move around the Pacific, people remembering him joking about climate change by talking about water lapping at the door of Pacific nations. People still remember that.
It's a bit of a long bow, isn't it?
Well, Caleb, she has a point and she has a problem, and that is that, yes, I have been to the international jamborees where the countries of the world gather to talk about climate, and yes, the Pacific nations have made a very big deal about Australia's position in this, while not talking at all about the fact that China is the largest emitter in the world and has been for some time. But the thing that's demanded of Australia, the measure by which this government will be measured, is whether or not we continue to export coal and liquefied natural gas. And don't all of this talk about us being a green energy superpower one day. We are an energy superpower today. We export the majority of the world's metallurgical coal and a vast amount of its liquefied natural gas. Now, the Pacific and a lot of other countries in the world want us to stop doing that. Now, the Labor Party has been asked, as the coalition has been asked, to stop doing that. I will bet my life on the fact that no Australian government in the next couple of years is going to give up that much revenue for the request of the Pacific Islands. Nor would the Pacific Islands get the amount of support they do from the Australian government if we didn't have that revenue. So yes, it's an issue, but Australia's in a bind. We cannot accede to that kind of demand. We'd be writing a very short suicide note.
Exactly, and you've only got to look at the dollar figures to see the reality of that. Chris Uhlmann, thank you so much for your time.